Minister, the view of People Before Profit, as I think you know well, is we believe the property tax is an unjust, regressive, unfair tax on the family home of huge numbers of working people who've struggled to purchase a home and then have this tax imposed on them. A tax which takes no account whatsoever of their income and their ability to pay. At the time that it was introduced, contrary to some of the comments that were made earlier, I think in your speech, as to what the rationale for it was supposed to be, what we were told at the time was that imposing this tax on the family home would lead to more funding for local government, and it would also do something to dampen the property market, which as a response, if you like, to the madness of the Celtic Tiger. So that was actually the rationale that was put forward at the time to justify it. The broadening of the tax base may have been mentioned as well, but the two central arguments that were put forward was it would lead to more money for local government, i.e. we get better local services, and it would do something to dampen the madness of the property market. It's done neither. That's the fact. It's done neither. There hasn't been an extra cent for local services or government as a result of it, because it replaced central government grants, and in many cases services have significantly declined in key areas, and self-evidently it did absolutely nothing to dampen property prices and the sort of craziness of a property market that we saw during 2006, 7, 8, which led to the crash. We're seeing it now with property prices rocketing again. And of course what it does do, therefore, and this is the reason you deferred the revaluations, and the reason you're trying to put some measures in this bill to try and limit the unfairness that would result from a revaluation in line with the original flawed and unfair tax. You have to adjust it because you would face massive political anger if it was adjusted based on current property valuations in line with the original tax. So this is an acknowledgement of all the points we have made from the outset that this is a fundamentally unfair tax. And although you've taken measures now to try and ameliorate the unfairness of it, fundamentally that unfairness remains and will continue as long as we continue to have, every 4 years now, revaluations and property tax increases resulting from it. The reasons, I'll briefly restate them, for why it is a fundamentally unfair tax is, as was said earlier on, it is in many cases a tax on a debt. So you're paying a tax on a huge mortgage debt that you already owe. It's a tax that charges you a different level of tax based on where you happen to live, regardless of the fact that your income might be exactly the same as people in other areas who are asked to pay less. That's a fundamental unfairness that is not addressed in this bill, or a point that really has never been acknowledged or addressed by the government in terms of the unfairness that we have always alleged about this tax. Now, one additional injustice, and I'd be interested to hear the Minister respond to this point, which was uncovered in an email that I received a while ago in our office, is about the interest that's charged for deferrals. And I know you've increased the deferral threshold now to €18,000 from €15,000. But something I didn't fully comprehend was that, I mean, first of all, let's say that the deferral based on people who have incomes less than 15,000 means we're going to charge interest for people who cannot pay because they are too poor, so you're going to be punished by having interest imposed on the deferral, which will have to be paid at some time. But what I didn't realize until this elderly woman contacted my office is that it's not simple interest on the total sum over the years that you're forced to defer because you're too poor to pay it, but it's compound interest. Now that makes it even worse. And just to sort of go through the details of one case of just how this makes it worse, if you're paying €405 a year in property tax, and then you defer because you're on 15,000 or less, as it was, now it's changed to 18,000, but if you defer, 4% is added annually, which means you would owe €4,212 after 10 years instead of $4,050, which is if you had paid it each year, if it was simple interest. It was simple interest. But it's not. It's compound interest, so in fact, at the end of 10 years, you will have paid €5,103, which is 891 more than the cost of 10 years property tax paid each year. So for being poor, you will be punished by having an additional 2 years property tax loaded on. So for being poor, for 10 years, too poor to pay the property tax, you will be forced to pay 12 years of property tax. Now that is grossly unfair. The elderly woman who contacted us pointing this out was so embarrassed by the fact that she had to defer, that her income was so low and that she was unable to pay, was too embarrassed even to tell her family members about her predicament and about her low income. So that is what you're doing, often to elderly, vulnerable, poor people, income poor people, who happen to live in a property that results in, a certain valuation and then the imposition of a certain level of tax. That is grossly, grossly unfair and regressive. And it stuns me that deputies can stand up here and say it's a progressive tax. It is absolutely not a progressive tax in that regard. It's also going to punish, by the way, people, particular sectors, who've lost income considerably during the COVID restrictions. The groups I often talk about, the taxi drivers, the musicians, the artists, people in the performing arts, tourism, and all the rest of it, they're going to be punished. Their income will have gone down very considerably over the last year. They'll still land with the same tax as somebody who mightn't have lost a cent. Or indeed the multi-billionaires and millionaires who've actually gained massively during COVID. And that brings me to my last point, is what's the alternative? Okay? We costed in our last in the 2020 budget submission that the alternative, for example, we could raise 400 million by not charging anything on a principal private residence, but charging €600 a year for a second house, €1,000 a year for a third and fourth house, and €1,500 for all houses in excess of 4. That would be a genuine wealth tax, and it would raise €400 million a year. Or we could put, as we have proposed every single year, a 2% tax on the top 85,000 households who own 53% of all the household wealth and assets in the country, which this year are up to €880 billion, up I think about €37 billion on last year. And by the way, the Central Bank Quarterly Report says that's mostly driven by an increase increase in investments in currency and financial rises in assets. So why not tax them 2%? And we could raise about 2 to 3 billion euro a year. A hell of a lot more than you're getting from the property tax, hell of a lot fairer. They wouldn't even feel it, and you wouldn't have to punish people who have little income, but who have a tax imposed on them because they happen to have their own home.